Hi, welcome back to the Memos to the President. I'm Ylli Bajraktari with the Special Competitive Studies Project. The purpose of these podcasts are really for the new Trump administration to look at what are some of the issues that are at the intersection of technology and national security that we have to double down and really move out to stay ahead. So today, in that vein, I am here with two of my colleagues, Joel and Joe. Welcome, guys. This is part two of the episode we recorded with Joe on what should the foreign policy look like when technology is the center of competition. Part of the foreign policy approach we have, Joe, as you know, is how do you bring allies and partners in that space. So we're releasing a memo for the president that talks about how do we pull comparative advantages among us and our allies and partners so we really lead in this age of AI. And so you guys wrote the memo. I'm looking forward to the conversation. But before we talk about the memo, I really want the audience to know who you guys are and how you ended up here.
Yeah, thanks for having us again, Ylli. It's my second time here with you, so always good to be with you.
Always good to talk to you, Joe.
So career-wise, like I said before, just for our audience that may have heard me the first time, went to school in Connecticut, grew up there, born in Taiwan, emigrated to Connecticut and grew up there and went to school there. Was in Peace Corps after undergrad, so spent 2 years in Kyrgyzstan trying to teach English to Kyrgyz, Russian, and other people in villages there, and just great, amazing experience. So that really opened my eyes to foreign policy and international relations. And so when I came back to the U.S., went to Georgetown, great university, great school, to the Masters of Science and Foreign Service program there to study foreign policy, international relations. Got very lucky, got a presidential management fellowship during my time there, and then started at the State Department first as the Belarus desk officer, then worked on the EU, spent some time detailed to the Hill, came back, worked for our undersecretaries for political affairs, Wendy Sherman and Tom Shannon, and then eventually made my way to the White House where we met, where I was working on Russia issues. Great times back then. So, and then obviously worked together on the AI Commission as well, and then ended up here at SCSP.
Excellent.
So thanks for keeping me around.
Yeah, and then we travel a lot. We travel a lot, Joe. Joel,
Sure.
Over to you.
Well, thanks. Also very nice to be here as well. I'm Joel. I grew up in London and lived in England until I was, 25. After I finished university, I worked in British politics for a few years, and then I got...
Where did you go to school, Joel?
I went to Oxford. Then once I finished, I did a master's at Cambridge for a year, and then I was quite interested in British politics. I worked as an advisor to Rory Stewart for a few years, and then I was very fortunate to get a scholarship to come out and study in the States. And after that, I've hung around kind of on and off. So I was an editor at Foreign Affairs just before I joined SCSP, and it's nice to be here.
Great to have you, Joel. Let's talk about the memo. So you have... The purpose of the memo really is to talk about how does this new era of alliances and partnership look like when technology is really the center of competition or the organizing principle, which we talk a lot about here at SCSP. So talk to me about the memo. You have 4 core objectives you think will achieve our national interest in getting there. Joe, do you want to get us started? Or?
Yeah, no, really. So I think this really builds off of the first memo that we had done, framing the broad foreign policy objectives that the United States really needs to pursue. And this one dives into the alliance building that needs to reinforce how we do this around the world. And the core ideas here really is, when we think about this era of competition, right? I mean, it's China, it's technology. Both of these elements of competition are global. And when we think about a global competition, we need to have a global alliance structure to help us do all of these things together. And the reality is, if you look at American history, if you look at global history for the past decades, the way that the U.S. has approached alliance building really is regional, right? NATO is there to deal with Soviet Union and Russia now, and the alliances that we had with Japan, Korea, and Australia, and some of the others in the Pacific were focused on the regional problems in Asia. And so as we think about some of the global challenges we face when it comes to tech competition with the PRC, we really do need to tie together our global allies in a new way that didn't really exist before. So that's really the structure of our memo, laying out 4 pillars on how we should do that. Joel?
I think that's right. I think it's that, the point's made in the memo that the way in which the United States approached alliance building during the Cold War was quite deliberate and quite strategic and very much focused around specific objectives. And that was very much containment and dealing with the Soviet Union. This is a new kind of challenge, and as a consequence, it requires a new kind of approach.
Can you talk a little bit about how we approached it during the Cold War, Joel? Because like SCSP is built on the model, a project led by Dr. Kissinger when in the 50s, which was probably the decade when we built these foundations of the alliance structure, NATO, nuclear deterrence in Europe, and then Asia and Pacific. So can you talk a little bit about this, how we did this in Cold War?
Sure. I mean, I think in the Cold War, it was quite, initially at least, it was quite incremental and quite gradual. So, I mean, obviously, after the Second World War, you have a huge number of voices in this country saying the United States should disengage, should come home, it's not our fight anymore. And the organization of NATO, I think, kind of drove a stake into the ground as a demonstration of how the United States could remain involved, recognizing its global responsibilities, but also benefiting, I think, from that global approach. And I think that kind of approach is one that has still lingered on in American statecraft subsequently, but is one that I think, I mean, Joe writes about this incredibly well in the paper, needs to be revived and reimagined. And also recognize that this isn't purely geopolitical anymore. There's a business angle, there's a technological angle, and it needs to be tied together again.
And it looks like, and Joe, over to you for this, but like we are entering a world in which you have, two major powers. You have a set of countries that aspire to be middle powers, and then you have global south. And so obviously different landscape technology is playing across all three layers in this new geopolitical environment. So what should we do there?
Yeah, and the way that we've organized the paper, the pillars, the recommendations is exactly that. So when we think about technologies like AI, quantum, biotech, really sophisticated, really high-end technologies that require a lot of investment, a lot of resources, a lot of talent, a lot of energy. Like for those high-end technologies, what we need to do really is pull together the right set of allies with the right capabilities. Right, that's a core idea that we have in the paper first and foremost. Make sure that we're working with our allies so we can pull our resources. Because the reality is, look, the United States can do this on our own, but having allies help us do this can help us get there faster. And the reality of being in a global competition also means that if we're not engaging with Europe, if we're not engaging with Asia, if we're not engaging with other allies and partners that have these capabilities, that have the talent, China's going to go after them. And so that competition really is about how
they have gone.
And they have,
they've
exactly.
invested, they've gone, they've expanded their influence.
Yeah, and so having that perspective and making sure we're pulling all of the right partners in for the right capabilities in different tech spheres, that's a huge part of how we need to think about how we build alliances. And it can't just be purely regional where, again, NATO is focused on Europe, Japan, Australia, Korea is only focused on Asia. We got to tie all of our partners together in a global way to deal with some of the global innovation challenges that come there. And the second part there really is, as we think about really high-end technologies that have national security implications, like AGI and AI, we've written about this a lot over the past years. Making sure that we have partners that have the right security requirements to safeguard these technologies is also really, really important.
Okay, Joe, let's go over the recommendations. Your first one is really organizing our most secure allies and partners to continue innovating and developing these critical technologies. Tell me more about this.
Yeah, look, again, I think if we conceive of the reality of the world that we live in today, right, we're in a global technology competition with the PRC. And the reality of all of the innovation power that we need to bring to bear on something like AGI, something like advanced networks, the capabilities, the resources, the talent, the energy that goes into these high-end technologies really are spread around the world. And so the first and foremost idea that we have on the paper and the memo is that we need to bring together our best allies and partners that have all of these capabilities to help us build out AGI and build out advanced networks. And the reality, again, is it's not just a regional thing where only our allies and partners in Europe have these capabilities. It's really dispersed around the world. And so having a more global approach to bring together allies and partners on this is really important. And especially, so first and foremost on AI, right? The data, the energy, the talent that needs to go into something.
You're talking about the whole infrastructure,
the entire
required,
ecosystem. The entire ecosystem and the entire stack, right? All of this is, again, spread around the world, and we're not competing for those resources. The reality is, again, China is going to go after them, and China is going to pull in the partners that are otherwise working with us. And on advanced networks, it's kind of the same idea. Let's look at the 5G example. We didn't have a technology solution for 5G. The Chinese did. And so as we think about future generations of advanced networks, we need to work with our allies in the UK, in the Nordics, in Asia, to develop the future standards and develop the future technologies that are going to shape the future digital infrastructure that we need to build out as well.
Why do you think this allied-centric approach to building this infrastructure is necessary, Joel?
I suppose because there's not really a good alternative. I mean, like Joe said, the United States could try and do it on its own, and in many ways it can. But if you have opportunities, you should take them. And those opportunities, in many cases, lie abroad.
Yeah.
I mean, we say in the memo, there's huge amounts of energy.
And every country adds something to the big...
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, you've got energy here, you've got people here, you've got talent, you've got data centers, but there's stuff abroad. And when you're working on kind of marginal advantages, as I think has been shown recently with DeepSeek and other instances of Chinese technological capability, you want to use every advantage you have. And if those advantages lie abroad, take them.
And especially if you face a competitor like China,
yeah, absolutely,
which is in size and scope and scale, really.
And they're doing this, right?
Exactly.
And if you don't do it, they'll be doing it.
Exactly. Well, let's talk about the second recommendations you guys have is really going after protecting critical technologies with your close allies. Tell me more about how you think this should happen.
Yeah, so first and foremost, again, kind of building off of our first recommendation, there are going to be some technologies like AGI that are going to be sensitive for national security. And so for those technologies, we got to make sure it's not just working with anybody. We need to make sure that the partners we work with have the right security safeguards to make sure that some of the technology and the IP doesn't just leak to our adversaries. I mean, Joe, do you want to talk to our Five Eyes framework?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we thought it was instructive to look at the Five Eyes example, intelligence community formed after the Second World War based on cooperation in the Second World War, and the way in which that organization has successfully managed to safeguard information, safeguard secrets, and while also facilitating the flow between allies, we thought was a good model to be adopted when it came to these hypersensitive technologies that can't be shared too widely. And so we thought that was possibly something to emulate and imitate.
And just to be clear, we're not just saying that it's only the Five Eyes partners, but it's the idea that we had built out during the Cold War of identifying these really capable partners with the right security frameworks that we could agree on and develop in common to have a shared security framework for protecting the intelligence that we had collected. And so in this case, it's about building a similar framework to protect the intellectual property and the resources that are going to go into a sensitive technology like AGI.
And I agree with you guys. I think my opinion about this has been that if all of our Five Eye partners keep building different infrastructure required for the age of AI, then I think our gap will increase even more. So every nation has a sovereign decision of what kind of infrastructure they will build or cloud that they want to use. But I think there should be some coordination there that our systems talk to each other, that we don't increase the gap of communication, information sharing, which has been really the foundation for the Five Eye partnership. But we really bring these technologies talking to each other much, much closely.
Yeah, I think in the Five Eyes always state five. Right, I know there's some countries out there that wanted to be the sixth eye for a number of different reasons, which all makes sense. I think that's one of the core alliance building work that we need to think about too, is how do we elevate partners and help them build the security infrastructure so that they can help us do this, right? Japan is in Five Eyes, but they have so much talent, so much energy, so much...
India.
India too. And so, how do we help elevate the security requirements and the security capabilities of our partners so that we can, and bring them into this highest tier of cooperation.
You have another interesting idea in your memo from Atoms for Peace to AGI for Peace. Can you talk a little bit about the origins of this idea?
Yeah, so really simply, I think if you look at Cold War history, one of the things that President Eisenhower did was leverage safe, secure nuclear technology as a way to build partnerships around the world. And so this is an interesting framework that we should think about for AGI as well, for AI and for AGI as well, right? We know that there can be sensitive national security risks for a technology like AGI, but then are there ways that we can build the right safeguards, build the right guardrails, and have a package of AGI and AI that we can then provide to the rest of the world that's going to be safe and secure, but that won't have the highest national security risks associated with it? And so, for example, when we think about the capabilities around AI, for health, for education, for energy efficiency, there's a lot there that AGI can do. And so for the US and our allies and partners, let's think about safeguarding, building the right guardrails into a really sensitive technology and having that packaged in a way that we can offer to the rest of the world. Because again, the alternative is that China's going to be doing this already. Yeah. And so it's not just about we're not saying we should just put a highly sensitive technology in a closet where only we have access to it, but let's figure out how we can build the right safeguards and offer a model that is as powerful as it can be to the rest of the world that can help really provide some of the core benefits to our societies in a way that is not going to have the national security risks associated with it.
Our third big recommendation in the memo is really how do you create a broad partnership with allies and partners to build safe and secure technologies so they can help us advance economic prosperity and protect national security. Can you tell us more about this?
Yeah, of course. I think it's informed really by this tiered idea of the United States has its kind of pinnacle of allies, the people with whom everything can be shared. And then as you go a little bit further down, there are technologies that are less sensitive and therefore can be shared more easily. And those technologies should be shared on the basis really of mutual prosperity. So there are applications of AI, of AGI, that can help with agriculture, help with healthcare, that really aren't a security risk in any way. And therefore they can be shared with allies and partners on that basis for mutual prosperity. And so we were trying to think of, well, I suppose the memo is trying to explain how that can be done constructively and to mutual benefit.
It's really about building out the markets, right? As we innovate, as we build new technologies, again, like Joel said, not everything is going to be super sensitive, not everything is going to be highly impactful for national security. But the reality is, like, the core thesis for SCSP is we're entering this era where AI and other emerging technologies are really going to transform not just national security, but our economic prosperity in the way that our societies operate. And so again, the big idea here is we need to go out to the rest of the world with a package of options of how these technologies can be used in everyday life, right? It's not just about the innovation and the R&D, but it's like how these things, again, can apply to health, education, agriculture, like basic elements of our economy and our society that, again, if we're not doing this, the PRC already is through Digital Silk Road, the Belt and Road Initiative, and other ways to make sure that they're building their influence around the world in the same way that we did in the past. And so we just got to be more competitive in how we think about foreign policy.
I agree, Joe. I mean, we've talked a lot about this, but I think the way here is really, countries around the world want to use now technology for their economic prosperity, improving healthcare, educational systems. So I think this is really a great opportunity to no longer view countries as, which we have traditionally viewed them as, like providing food security assistance, humanitarian assistance. I think now countries are at a different point in which they want to improve their capabilities, modernize their technology infrastructure. And I think this is a great opportunity for allies and partners to go in with a package, as you said, and offer them ways to improve their digital infrastructure, whether it's in healthcare or education, even in national security, right? But I think we didn't have an alternative package to the Chinese model. Right?
Yeah, really, it's about building new partnerships.
But I think we have to be more aggressive here, take and look at it from a purely economic prosperity and national security. And I think when you have that mind shift change or the policy change, then I think things happen because, technology companies want to expand their market, countries want to expand their influence, obviously, and you ultimately want to counter the Chinese efforts in these countries. One of the ideas, Joe, you have in this memo also is creating a technology bank. Can you talk a little bit about more and what does it mean?
Yeah, and I think this is reflecting, as we look at how global institutions have been effective or not effective, right? I think there's a case to be made that as we think about some of the UN institutions, they've gone too global and too inclusive in a way where the adversaries are in these institutions in a way that really undermine our interests, our democratic values and interests. And so as we think about how we work with allies and partners, like let's just build our own institutions and make sure that we can be cohesive in having partners that are like-minded about what we're trying to do. And so when we think about technology and building out the global digital infrastructure as all of these different technologies come online, like let's have a financial institution that is allies only, that can pull our resources and go after some of these things together. I mean, imagine if there were a bank that was focused on 5G or future networks, and that's all it did.
Right.
Like we would just solve the 5G problem as it is, right? And so
because the companies were there, capabilities were there.
Exactly. The financing wasn't there. And so it really is like, let's have an allied framework to provide the financing to support American technologies and other technologies that are much more aligned with our values rather than the alternative.
Yeah. Last big recommendation, Joel, is really how do we slow down or prevent our rivals from gaining access to these critical technologies? A lot has been said. We have done a lot since 2017, I think. We have improved our departments that deal with this issue. We have issued policies, 3 rounds of almost export controls policies targeted around this issue. What more can we do here?
I think you need as holistic a package as possible. I mean, obviously, I think the past administration, the current administration are going to be increasingly muscular when it comes to all of this, but it's just looking at every single opportunity to ensure that your rival's progress is impeded and your progress is boosted. And so we need to look at every aspect of that in the same way that when you look abroad and you look at those capabilities that can be found, those capabilities that can be used, you need to look abroad and look at every opportunity you have to pinch access, to crack down on evasion, and to look at what is needed and therefore restrict that accordingly.
It's February, which means a set of international conferences will start soon. I'm sure new administration thinks a lot about how they're going to approach the allies and partners piece. What would be your recommendation, Chet, to the president today on how to approach this issue? And Joel, for you, the question is, if you're an allied country, how do you come to the table with the new administration?
Yeah, I think, our friend Nadia Shadlow, former Deputy National Security Advisor, says this really, really well. And I think the new Secretary of State has said this as well. It's really about shared responsibility. That's what the president has been talking about this entire time.
I agree
in his first administration, in the intervening years, and a lot of what he's trying to do now. The core ideas of what the president is trying to do really isn't different from the traditional rhetoric that I think our allies and partners hear from the White House, but it's the words that the president uses, I think, are sharper and much more direct in calling out where we want allies and partners to step up. And so in reality, it's allies and partners really need to look at this time and opportunity to really step up, take on their fair share of the burden, make sure that they're standing with the United States as we're trying to advance our interests, be it in Ukraine, be it on Taiwan, be it in the rest of the world, be it in competing against the PRC. Like, we all have a role to play here. It can't just be the U.S. doing this on our own, and then some of our allies and partners kind of cutting deals in the back that undermine the broader interests. And so It's really making sure that everyone is on the same page, trying to do the right thing, and putting in their fair share.
Joel?
I think that's completely right. I mean, I don't really have much to add to that because I think that's correct. I mean, it's like anything. You think about what you have to offer and you offer it. And if there's an ask, and also particularly with things like NATO spending, long-standing agreement, it should be done.
Right. I mean, the way I think about this, Joe, is number one is, are we all on the same page, among allies and partners regarding the threat we face? And, I would argue a lot of progress has been made there, but I don't think we're all on the same page yet. I don't think everybody views China as a, once-in-a-generation threat, not just ideological threat, but also political, financial, technological, most importantly. So that's number one. Number two is, are we all investing the same share to prepare ourselves and our economies and our societies for that competition? Again, I would argue the results are mixed there, because the countries that are failing to understand this threat are not doing the necessary investments, right? Both on the security side, but also on the technology side. And then the last piece is, who brings what to the table? It shouldn't be always just the United States of America bringing technology, military capabilities, and everything. To your point about shared responsibility, I think this is the time where countries really make the bet and they invest. And I think the technology is the way forward, because it's going to propel all of us to these new levels with AI, I think, because look at what's happening around us right now.
No, that's why look, the bottom line for our memo here really is, like, first and foremost, like, the United States should bring in allies and partners to help us innovate and develop the new technologies. Period, full stop, right? It makes sense. We bring in more capabilities and resources. It lowers the relative cost just for the U.S. to do this on our own. So let's bring in allies and partners to do this with us. When there are sensitive national security-related technologies, let's make sure that we have the right allies and partners to build the right safeguards to make sure that we're not proliferating dangerous technologies that can come back to harm us. Third, as we think about the broader landscape, let's work with our allies and partners to build out broader partnerships with the less capable nations that may not have the highest level of development, but can still use and still want a lot of the technologies that can help elevate their societies, their economies, and their national security, right? And fourth and lastly, but not least, let's make sure that we're cutting out our adversaries from this tech ecosystem to make sure that we're not accidentally, unintentionally helping them build capabilities that will come back to harm us.
Right. Okay, guys, I'd like to end the podcast like I do with every guest I've had, basically asking them, if you're a student watching this or aspiring to come to Washington, be an intern or work full-time with any of the departments and agencies, Why would you do that?
Look, I think there's no more transformative time in recent history than what we're going through right now, right? With all of the political changes around the world, all of the technological changes, like we're in a really interesting time of history, right? I think we can all agree on that. And in many ways, like there's still no better place to really work on cross-cutting global national interest issues than in your capitals. And obviously here in Washington, D.C., even though we're a little bit outside in Crystal City, like this is where a lot of the action is going to happen when it comes to tying together a national strategy.
Absolutely.
And so being around here, being with people that are working on these really cutting edge issues, I think is incredible. And so for the students out there, like don't lose sight of there's a lot of desire to go to Silicon Valley, to go to New York when it comes to like working on the tech itself, but also on some of the financing side of what New York offers. But in DC, this is the only place that ties together all of the issues in a way that that doesn't exist anywhere else.
Joel?
Well, I need to qualify that.
With your short time in DC.
I was going to say, I think it's just do something interesting.
Yeah.
I mean,
what is the vibe you get from Washington? As somebody who wasn't born here, just moved recently.
It's very strange.
Yeah?
It's very strange.
No, please elaborate.
It's very strange.
Yeah,
It's very interesting. And I think the concentration, I mean, I was in New York for a while, and people talk about a certain thing there.
Right.
Boston, people talk about certain things there.
Yeah.
But I just think you have a concentration of interesting people in Washington, interesting subjects being discussed.
Just interesting, Joel?
Sorry?
Just interesting people?
Well, interesting and important as well.
Right.
But, I think there's a very easy path that one can follow after university. And I think doing something that actually is meaningful has a lot of value to it.
A good point, Joel. Thank you to both of you. The memo is out. So to all of you watching us or listening to us, please take a look at the memo that Joel and Joe drafted on the memo to the president. Thank you for watching and listening. See you next time.